Well, Kevin, while you and I were at OpenAI Developer Day learning about everything that's coming to ChatGPT, OpenAI was arguably making much bigger news outside the conference.
Yes, they were moving markets, the entire stock market. Not the entire stock market, but a couple companies.
And this was one where I was focused on the things in front of me. And when I got out of Developer Day, I thought, I really need to get up to speed on everything that is going on with chips. And whenever I have that feeling, I think, one, oh no, I have to talk about chips again. But two, can Kevin Roose, our resident in-house chips expert, smarten me up?
Thank you. That's very kind, but I would say I am an aspiring chips expert. I do not know everything there is to know about the semiconductor industry or GPUs, but I aspire to learn much more. And actually, I took a big step in that direction over last weekend at The Curve, this other AI conference we both attended, when I happened to find myself like in the middle of kind of a scrum of like chips guys who were talking about chips. And I understood like 40% of what they were saying. They were talking about, HBM and EUVs and gas turbines and geothermal. And I was just like transfixed because all the AI guys have had to become chips guys. And I am saying right here on this podcast that I will, by the end of 2025, be a chips guy.
That's great to hear, and I think we can make some big strides in that direction this week because OpenAI made some big deals. I need to understand what's happening, and so we're going to pilot a new segment that we're calling, What the Hell's Going On with All These Chips Exactly?
It's a little unwieldy. We might want to tighten that one.
So let's get started with this deal with AMD. Tell me exactly what OpenAI is up to here.
So we talked a couple weeks ago about OpenAI's big deal with NVIDIA, who is the leading chip manufacturer. They make the best and most expensive and highest quality chips for training AI systems. But the number two player in that market, the GPU market, is AMD, who's NVIDIA's competitor and sort of seen as a kind of distant second place in the GPU arms race.
This is like the Pepsi of chips.
It's the Pepsi of chips, exactly. So this week, OpenAI and AMD announced a major multi-billion-dollar deal where OpenAI is going to buy a bunch of GPUs from AMD and put them in their data centers over the next few years. And in return, they are going to get some AMD stock. This could eventually become up to 10% of the company at a penny per share. So basically free stock or stock at a very, very low price compared to what it trades for today. And this will all play out over the course of a number of years. They will start with AMD's newest chip in 2026, and they are going to try to buy a total of 6 gigawatts worth of AMD chips, which is a little more than half of what they are going to get from NVIDIA in the terms of that deal. NVIDIA's deal was for 10 gigawatts worth of GPUs. So the big picture here is that OpenAI is doing these deals with many, many chip providers and infrastructure providers. And if you kind of add it all up, just the announcements from AMD and NVIDIA and a handful of other companies that they've struck deals with, they are building a $1 trillion GPU empire over the next few years. That is their stated ambition and plan, and now they have the deals in place to do that. And I don't know if you remember a few months ago when there was this reporting about how Sam Altman was trying to raise $7 trillion for a chip company, and everyone kind of said, ha, 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 that's like such a crazy number. That would be like some, huge multiple of, the total lifetime earnings of OpenAI. Well, it's not $7 trillion, but now they have pledged to spend roughly $1 trillion over the next few years.
Well, when I got into business, they told me the first trillion is always the hardest.
They do say that.
Yeah. Something about me, Kevin, is that I didn't until very recently understand what a gigawatt was in any practical terms. My understanding, based on the reading that I've done, is a gigawatt of energy is about what is produced by a nuclear reactor. And OpenAI is now committing to infrastructure that will require the equivalent energy of 20 nuclear reactors.
Yes, it is a huge amount of energy, and that's a whole separate discussion. Like, it's one thing to buy the GPUs. It's another thing to be able to turn them on. And so we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, in a later episode, but there is sort of a simultaneous race going on to lock up the energy that is going to be required to power all of these millions of GPUs.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe this is an obvious question, but tell me just in basic terms, what do OpenAI and AMD each get out of this deal that they just made?
Essentially, the deal structure goes like this. OpenAI is going to buy a bunch of chips from AMD. It's going to use those chips to train and power its models. And in exchange for those purchases, AMD is going to give OpenAI the rights to buy very cheap stock in AMD. So when they reach a gigawatt of compute that they've purchased from AMD, they will get some allocation of stock in AMD, which could be worth, many billions of dollars. What OpenAI is doing is signaling to AMD, hey, if you guys go build a bunch of really good GPUs, we will buy them from you. And the way that they are sort of getting this financing is in the form of a stock, essentially rebate on that purchase.
So let me see if I have this straight, because when I look at this, I see OpenAI gets access to a bunch of infrastructure plus a financial stake in the chip maker. AMD gets a huge new customer and ensures a lot of future demand. That just kind of looks like a win-win to me for them. Is there anything I'm missing there?
So the other thing that's really important here is that OpenAI and AMD are going to have a collaborative partnership in designing not just these chips, but the software that runs on these chips. So one of the big sort of hurdles that AMD has had in competing with NVIDIA is that NVIDIA's software, which is called CUDA, is seen as much, much better for training AI models than AMD's software, which is called ROCm. So basically, OpenAI, as a result of this partnership, will have an incentive to make AMD's software just as good as NVIDIA's software. And so this could actually help AMD in that way too, where, they're making these chips, they're selling them to OpenAI, but also OpenAI is helping to write the software that runs on these chips, thereby making these AMD chips more compelling to other AI developers who want to build models using them. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes. So this gets to the second big question that I have for you today, which is, how is this deal connected to the other chips and infrastructure deals that OpenAI has made recently? When we talked about the NVIDIA deal on the show, I said that I had heard some speculation that one reason that NVIDIA wanted to make the deal that it did was to discourage OpenAI from going out and making a bunch of other deals with other chip companies. In hindsight, that seems like a very silly thing that I said, because OpenAI is clearly going to make a deal with whoever it can. So tell me as best as you can how all these deals interrelate, or is it as simple as OpenAI needs more infrastructure than any one company can provide, and so it's just going to go out and lock up as much of it as it can?
Yeah, I think that's more the explanation. I don't actually think this is about crowding anyone else out of the market, any AI maker or chip maker. I think this is just them saying, we are going to need a lot of GPUs, more than any one company can make, and probably more than any of these companies are planning to make currently. So they're also trying to sort of encourage these companies to up their production to meet this incredible demand. And, it is always good to have more than one supplier. You can kind of play them off each other and maybe, increase the competition between them. And so I think OpenAI is just kind of spreading its bets a little bit here, but they do believe that they are going to need all these chips and many more. Essentially, what they have been saying is, we are compute constrained right now. We have a lot of products that we're building, things that we want to do that we can't do because we don't have enough compute for it. And so they are trying to sort of lock in as much compute as they can, and then, build out their data centers and find the energy to power all of this, and then, use their big clusters to train models that hopefully will take us all the way to AGI. That's the idea anyway.
Yeah, at OpenAI Developer Day this week, Greg Brockman, the company's president, said, "You don't even know the products that we haven't released because we do not have the compute to power them." So apparently there's a bunch of services OpenAI's sitting on, and maybe some of these deals will get them closer to releasing them, for better and for worse. So let me now ask a question that is considered extremely impolite in Silicon Valley, and it's the sort of thing that might get you asked to leave a party. How is OpenAI going to pay for all of this?
It's a great question because they do not have $1 trillion. I'll tell you that, lying around in their bank account. They have not given a ton of details about how they plan to pay for this, but essentially they're going to go out, they're going to raise a bunch of money, as they have been doing for the past several years, and they are going to use that money to make these deals and buy these chips. Greg Brockman told Bloomberg Television this week that they look at equity and debt and all kinds of ways to pay for it. They also plan to pay for this by generating more revenue through ChatGPT and their other products. So when you look at the $1 trillion stated cost of all this, they're going to try to cobble that together through a combination of new fundraising, maybe some more vendor financing like what they got from NVIDIA, and just the revenue that they're making from their products.
Also, Kevin, once again at Developer Day, when asked about this, Sam Altman said something to the effect of, "We may have to come up with some new kinds of financial instruments to pay for this." And I will say that usually the point in the bubble where people start talking about the novel financial instruments that they need to create to finance their ambitions is the point where I get nervous.
Totally. I mean, the worry here is about all of these financial instruments and all these, many hundreds of billions of dollars of commitments, is that OpenAI is essentially becoming too big to fail, right? That they are so tied up with so many huge companies that if they were to fizzle out, or their newest model were to be a flop, or they were to somehow reach the end of their sort of scaling paradigm, that all of this would come crashing down and create ripple effects throughout the U.S. economy. I don't think that's the most possible outcome here, but I do think that all of this circularity and all these sort of interchanging deals and flows of money do make me a bit more nervous that something like a recession could cause not just one of these companies to collapse, but could cause like systemic effects throughout the AI industry, which is like propping up the entire US economy at this point. So it does feel like we have reached a point where the AI companies must deliver on the promise of AGI, or else we are all in a pretty bad situation.
Or if not deliver on the promise of AGI, at least continue to make services that other companies are willing to spend billions of dollars on because they feel like it's making their workers more productive.
That's true. It could just be that the models never get any better, and just the increased adoption of the models sort of powers this like revenue flywheel that results in all of this going well for everyone. But I do think there's kind of an implicit understanding among the investors in these companies that this is all building towards something that will eventually create trillions of dollars in economic value, that will not just be like a kind of across the board, incremental step up, but that it will be transformational, that it will be like electricity, and that all of the sort of investments that are going into this, even at these shocking prices, will be paid back many times over, because this technology will change everything. And so like, I think there's a way to make the math work, even if they don't reach like the machine god super intelligence. But it's a lot easier to sell the vision if the pot of gold that you are saying is at the end of this rainbow is in fact like trillions of dollars and an entirely new sort of society.
All right, Kevin. So as we start to wrap up here, I want to know what the larger implications are for all of these deals. What does this mean for companies that are not OpenAI, that also want gigawatts of power and as many GPUs as they can get their hands on, now that OpenAI seems to be locking up so much future supply?
So I think other AI companies are going to have to sort of do their own versions of these deals. They're going to have to, bid on chips essentially in a seller's market. I know Anthropic and Google and all these companies are spending billions and billions of dollars trying to lock up future chip supply. But I think the big implication here is that we are just as a country making a gigantic leveraged bet on AI. I want to read you a quote that I saw this week from an analyst at Bernstein, Stacy Rasgon, who wrote that Sam Altman now, quote, has the power to crash the global economy for a decade or take us all to the promised land. And right now, we don't know which is in the cards. When Wall Street analysts start talking like that, you know that something big is happening. And, I'm sure you've seen all these diagrams. There was a great one in Bloomberg the other day. There was another one in the Financial Times recently showing just the various interconnections between all of the players in the AI ecosystem who are selling chips to each other and buying chips from each other and investing in each other and lending to each other. And it creates this kind of circularity that I think worries a lot of investors who think that this could all sort of come crashing down together if and when the AI bubble pops.
I'll give you another one, Kevin. This week, a Harvard economist named Jason Furman estimated that investments in data centers and information processing software accounted for 92% of the U.S.'s GDP growth in the first half of this year. So, according to my rough calculations, that's most of the U.S. GDP growth.
Yeah. And we should also say this is not just OpenAI. Elon Musk's xAI also reportedly is nearing a deal to raise billions of dollars, including from NVIDIA. So they are doing just as many financialized transactions around trying to pay for these massive infrastructure buildouts that they're doing as OpenAI is. But this is also an area where I think OpenAI has a strategic advantage, and that strategic advantage is named Sam Altman. Sam Altman is famously talented at fundraising. Many people think he is one of the greatest fundraisers in Silicon Valley history. And so he has been, canvassing the globe looking for giant pools of money that he can kind of suck up and use to fund OpenAI's ambitions. And I would not necessarily bet on Sam Altman in every case, but I would say that if the question is, can he continue to raise money to fund OpenAI's growth, I think I would feel uncomfortable betting against that because he has such a track record of being able to raise massive amounts of money.
Yeah, I also would not bet against him.
Okay, Casey, let me ask you a question. You've been asking questions here. What would it take me to fully chip pill you, to convince you that what is going on with GPUs and semiconductors and data centers right now is the most important story in the world?
A huge chip-related disaster. And I'm not even kidding. Because while I think it is a public service to tell people how much money is being invested and how interconnected all of these companies are and how crazy it would be if all of this does pay off, for the moment, everything is just kind of working. And given that, let's say, the many crises we have in this world right now, I just tend to not get too wrapped up in the stuff that basically just looks like capitalism proceeding apace. Now, that said, I understand that all the numbers here are unprecedented, which I do think is fun to talk about. That's why we're talking about it this week. But if you really want to get me hooked, something's got to go terribly wrong in one of these data centers, Kevin.
I'm envisioning, do you remember the scene in The Big Short where Margot Robbie is explaining mortgage-backed securities in a bathtub?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just having a vision of someone equally attractive to you explaining collateralized GPUs and warrant financing. And maybe that's how we can get you interested.
All right. Let's see what John Cena is doing later.
Call your agent, John.
So what happens next here, Kevin? What should I keep my eye on if I am trying to become more chip-pilled like you, my good friend?
So becoming chip-pilled, I am learning, is just the first step in the journey of becoming infrastructure-pilled. Because not only are these companies doing big deals to lock up the GPUs, they are also doing big deals to lock up the energy and the physical space to power these chips in these giant data centers. They are locking up contracts with skilled electricians and cooling specialists. There's now sort of a market. I was having a conversation with someone recently who described the sort of boom in skilled electricians for these data centers who are now flying all over the country making just gobs and gobs of money. They compared it to like the fracking boom when you had these like riggers and drillers who would like go up to North Dakota for, a month a year and make a ton of money. And they said this is basically what electricians who work on these data centers are doing now. So I expect there to be a massive boom in not just the GPUs that power the models, but the power supplies and the data centers and the cooling systems and the literal energy, like the natural gas and oil that power the electrical grids in the states where these data centers are going up. I expect that the AI companies are going to be doing lots of deals in those industries as well.
All right. Well, I feel like I've already exhausted all of the chip-related puns that I would normally use to end a segment on previous episodes. So I guess I'll just say this segment has made me hungry for guacamole.
You know what they call the end of a segment about chips?
What's that?
A chip clip.
Perfect. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.